Jim Lawson froze, his heart seizing in his chest as a sleek black sedan glided to a halt in front of his dilapidated rental home. 30 years ago, he'd been the formidable leader of a roaring motorcycle club, guiding a thunderous escort to shield a bullied child. Now, at 72, he was just a broken old man, staring down the barrel of eviction. As a doctor and a lawyer emerged from the car and began to approach, Jim braced himself for yet another wave of bad news, utterly oblivious to the life-altering revelation that was about to unfold. Welcome to Moments Revealed. Let's begin. As his unexpected visitors neared the porch, Jim flung his door open before they could even knock, his jaw set, determined to confront whatever fresh trouble they brought head-on. "Mr. Lawson?" The woman's voice was crisp and professional, yet surprisingly kind. She appeared to be in her 40s, impeccably dressed in an expensive charcoal suit. "My name is Beverly Chen. I'm an attorney with Chen and Associates. This is my colleague, Dr. Thomas Reed." Jim nodded wearily, his gaze shifting between them. The doctor, a tall African-American man, perhaps in his late 30s, carried himself with an air of quiet confidence, yet struck Jim as strangely nervous. "Whatever you're selling, I can't afford it," Jim stated flatly, his voice gravelly with resignation. Beverly Chen offered a small, reassuring smile. "We're not selling anything, Mr. Lawson. We just need a few minutes of your time. It's regarding a personal matter." "Personal matter?" Jim's mind began to race, sifting through a myriad of possibilities. Had one of his old Iron Horsemen brothers passed away and left him something? Was this about his health? He'd skipped his last doctor's appointment because he simply couldn't afford the copay. Fine. He finally relented, stepping back to allow them entry. "But I don't have any coffee to offer." "That's quite all right." Dr. Reed spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a subtle hint of an emotion Jim couldn't quite place. "We won't take much of your time." Jim led them into his small, cramped living room. Decades ago, this very house had been the bustling clubhouse of the Iron Horsemen, a sprawling, vibrant space where dozens of bikers gathered, their laughter echoing as they planned epic rides and boisterous parties. Now, his world had shrunk, confined to these four walls filled with worn, second-hand furniture and fading photographs. The visitors settled carefully onto his threadbare sofa while Jim lowered himself into his creaking recliner, the springs protesting loudly under his weight. His old cat, Diesel, a gray tabby, immediately hopped onto his lap, curling up and purring contentlessly. The animal's uncanny instinct for when Jim needed comfort was truly remarkable. "So, what's this about?" Jim asked, his fingers gently stroking Diesel's soft fur. Beverly and Dr. Reed exchanged a quick, knowing glance before she unlatched her briefcase. "Mr. Lawson, do you remember a boy named Tommy Miller?" Jim frowned, the name stirring something deep within his memory, a faint echo from a distant past. "Tommy Miller," he repeated slowly, tasting the words. "Skinny kid? This would have been, 30 years back?" Dr. Reed leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Jim's face. "Yes, he would have been about 12 years old at the time." Jim's eyes narrowed as fragments of that long-ago memory began to surface, coalescing into a clearer image. "There was a situation at the middle school," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "Some kid getting roughed up pretty bad." "That's right, Mr. Lawson," Dr. Reed said, his voice now tight with emotion, a barely contained tremor of feeling. Tommy Miller was that kid. Jim nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place, the memories sharpening into vivid focus. Yeah, I remember now. Some of the boys told us about it at the clubhouse. This kid getting beaten up every day. School wasn't doing anything about it, so we decided to step in. Jim looked up abruptly, a sudden suspicion clouding his face. Wait, you're not here to say we did something wrong, are you? 'Cause we checked with Tommy's mom first. Got her permission. No, Mr. Lawson, Beverly said, a warm smile gracing her lips. Quite the opposite, in fact. Dr. Reed reached into his pocket and carefully withdrew an old, worn photograph, handing it gently to Jim. The image depicted a group of leather-clad bikers, their rugged faces softened, surrounding a small, skinny black boy with thick glasses and a tentative smile. Jim immediately recognized his younger self in the photograph, standing protectively beside the child, his hand resting reassuringly on the boy's shoulder. I have carried this picture with me for 30 years, Dr. Reed said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Jim stared at the faded photo, then slowly lifted his gaze to Dr. Reed's face, recognition dawning in his eyes, a profound understanding slowly spreading across his features. You're Tommy, he whispered, the realization like a jolt. Dr. Reed nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I am. Jim's weathered hands trembled slightly as he looked back down at the photograph, then back up at the man before him. Well, I'll be damned. Millfield Middle School, 1993. Please, Mom, I'm sick. I can't go today. 12-year-old Tommy Miller sat on the edge of his bed, still in his pajamas, desperately trying to convince his mother he was suffering from a debilitating stomach bug. Gloria Miller placed a gentle hand on her son's forehead. No fever, baby. And this is the 3rd time this week. She sat beside him, her nurse's scrubs already wrinkled from the night shift she'd just finished. Her voice was firm but gentle as she pressed. What's really going on, Tommy? Tommy looked down, adjusting his thick glasses, mumbling, Nothing. Look at me. Her voice held a note of unyielding demand. When he finally raised his head, Gloria gasped. In the clearer morning light, she could now plainly see the faint purplish bruise near his eye, which he'd been trying to hide by keeping his head bowed. Who did this to you? She demanded, her voice sharp with alarm and a burgeoning anger. The story came tumbling out, a torrent of suppressed fear and humiliation. How a particular group of boys had targeted him since the very beginning of the school year. How they mocked his glasses, his second-hand clothes, his passionate interest in science. How their bullying had steadily escalated from cruel verbal taunts to aggressive shoving, then to deliberate tripping, and now to actual physical hitting. He recounted how the teacher had seen it all but done nothing, and how the principal had simply told him to toughen up. I've called the school 3 times, Gloria declared, her voice tightening with barely contained fury. They keep promising to handle it, but clearly they haven't. It'll just make it worse if you go in again, Tommy pleaded, his voice small and desperate. Please, Mom. Gloria pulled her son into a tight hug, feeling his thin shoulders shake with suppressed tears. Single-handedly raising a son while working grueling night shifts as a nurse had never been easy, but moments like this broke her heart completely. Tommy was brilliant, reading at a college level, effortlessly doing high school math, and dreaming of becoming a doctor someday. But what good was all that incredible brilliance? If he was terrified to even step foot in a school? "Okay," she said finally, her decision made. "You can stay home today, but we need to figure something out." Later that afternoon, while Tommy was finally sleeping soundly, Gloria sat at their humble kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in front of her. She felt utterly, profoundly helpless. The school administration had unequivocally failed her son, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she simply couldn't afford private school on a nurse's salary. Moving to another district wasn't an option. Their meager funds wouldn't allow it. A low, rumbling sound outside drew her attention away from her despair. Looking through the window, Gloria saw 3 motorcycles rumble to a stop in front of Mrs. Davenport's house next door. She watched as the riders dismounted, large men in leather vests covered with patches, the Iron Horsemen. Everyone in Millfield knew about them. They had a clubhouse on the edge of town, and rumors about their activities ranged from the merely rowdy to the outright criminal. Gloria was about to turn away, dismissing them, when she noticed Mrs. Davenport, 83 years old, and a widow, step out to greet the bikers with surprising warmth, embracing them. One of the burly men handed her a bag of groceries, while another appeared to be explaining something about her porch steps, pointing at some loose boards. Curious, Gloria found herself stepping outside. "Gloria, come meet my boys." Mrs. Davenport waved her over enthusiastically. "They fixed things around the house for me since my Arthur passed." Surprised, Gloria approached cautiously. Up close, the bikers were even more imposing, tall and weathered with rugged beards and intricate tattoos. Yet they nodded respectfully as Mrs. Davenport introduced them. "This is Jim. He's the vice president of their club," Mrs. Davenport said, patting the arm of a muscular man with a salt and pepper beard. "And that's Bear and Tiny." Bear, who was indeed bear-like in his imposing size, was already examining the loose boards on the porch steps, while Tiny, who was anything but small, stood patiently holding grocery bags. "Nice to meet you," Gloria said, her voice a little hesitant. "I'm Gloria Miller. I live next door with my son, Tommy." Jim nodded. "Mrs. Davenport's told us about you. Says you're a nurse over at County. Work the night shift. Raising a boy on your own. That's not easy." Gloria was genuinely surprised by the genuine respect in his voice, the understanding in his eyes. "No, it's not," she admitted. Mrs. Davenport frowned suddenly. "How's Tommy? I haven't seen him riding his bike lately." The quiet concern in the old woman's voice broke something in Gloria. Before she knew it, the whole agonizing story came tumbling out. The relentless bullying, the school's baffling indifference, Tommy's growing, crippling fear. "Those little bastards," Bear growled, looking up from the steps, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Sorry for the language, ma'am, but shed you are. Ma'am, Emmy." Jim had gone quiet, a muscle working visibly in his jaw. "The school knows, and they won't do anything?" he asked, his voice low. Gloria nodded wearily. "They say without witnesses willing to come forward, it's just Tommy's word against theirs, and no one will speak up because they're afraid they'll be next." "Fear's a powerful thing," Jim said quietly, his gaze distant for a moment. Then, after a moment's thought, he asked, "Would you be willing to try something a little unconventional?" 2 days later, Tommy Miller stared out his bedroom window in disbelief, his mouth agape. The entire street in front of his house was filled with motorcycles, at least 20 of them. their chrome gleaming like polished silver in the morning sun. Riders in leather vests stood beside their bikes, some talking in groups, others meticulously checking their machines. "Mom!" he called uncertainly, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are there bikers outside our house?" Gloria appeared in his doorway, a wide, confident smile spreading across her face. "They're your escort to school today." "My what? Your escort?" "Your escort," she repeated, her smile unwavering. "Jim and the Iron Horsemen are going to make sure you get to school safely, and they're going to pick you up this afternoon, too." Tommy gaped at her, his eyes wide. "But everyone will stare." "That's kind of the point, honey." Gloria sat on the edge of his bed. "Look, the school won't protect you. The teachers won't step up, so we're trying something different. But they'll just beat me up worse. Tomorrow," Tommy protested, fear still etched on his face. "Actually, I think they might not," Gloria said, her voice confident. "Jim and his friends are going to have a talk with the school today, too, and they'll be taking you to and from school all week. After that, well, let's see what happens." 30 minutes later, Tommy found himself walking down the school hallway, flanked by Jim Lawson and Bear, two of the largest, most intimidating men he'd ever seen. Students pressed themselves against lockers, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, to let the formidable trio pass. Teachers emerged from classrooms, their initial looks of concern quickly replaced by utter confusion when they saw Tommy calmly walking between the two imposing bikers. The principal, Mr. Stevens, met them outside Tommy's classroom, his face flushed with irritation and bewilderment. "Excuse me, but you can't just—" "Actually, we can," Jim interrupted smoothly, his voice calm but firm. "We're listed as Tommy's authorized escorts in the school records. His mother added us yesterday. You can check if you'd like." Mr. Stevens blinked rapidly, sputtering. "That's not... I mean, this is highly irregular." "So is letting a 12-year-old get beaten up on school grounds," Bear rumbled, his deep voice carrying clearly down the hallway, drawing even more attention. "That seems pretty damn irregular to me." Students were openly staring now, whispers rippling through the crowd. Tommy spotted Jason Mercer and his friends, his tormentors, watching with wide, stunned eyes from the back of the gathering crowd, their usual bravado completely gone. Jim knelt down to Tommy's eye level, his gaze steady and reassuring. "We'll be right outside at 3 o'clock. If anyone gives you trouble today, anyone at all, you tell us. Understand?" Tommy nodded, a strange, unfamiliar feeling spreading through his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as safety, a profound, unexpected sense of security. As Jim and Bear turned to leave, Jim paused beside Principal Stevens. "By the way," he said, just loud enough for the nearby students to hear every word, "the Iron Horsemen take care of their friends. Tommy's our friend now. Might want to spread the word." That afternoon, the bikers were waiting as promised, their engines rumbling a steady chorus. And the next morning, and every morning and afternoon, that week, each day more riders joined the escort, a growing parade of chrome and leather. Women bikers, too, just as tough-looking and resolute as the men, would high-five Tommy, ask about his classes, and share jokes, making him laugh. By Wednesday, Tommy noticed something strange. Kids who had never spoken to him before were now saying hello in the hallways, their voices friendly. A girl in his math class even asked if she could sit with him at lunch. On Thursday, Jason Mercer, the ringleader of his tormentors, crossed immediately to the other side of the hallway when he saw Tommy approaching, avoiding eye contact entirely. On Friday afternoon, as Tommy walked out of school, the entire Iron Horseman Motorcycle Club was waiting for him. Nearly 50 bikes lined up, their engines rumbling in what felt like a thunderous ovation. Jim stepped forward, a proud smile on his face, and handed Tommy a leather vest, child-sized but otherwise identical to those worn by every member of the club. "Honorary member," Jim explained, a warm pride in his voice, as the boy stared in awe at the Iron Horseman patch emblazoned on the back. "You've got guts, kid." That evening, they took a photograph. Tommy, beaming in his new vest, was surrounded by his leather-clad protectors. Jim had his hand on Tommy's shoulder, both of them smiling genuinely at the camera. The bullying stopped entirely after that week. The escort continued for another 2 weeks, gradually reducing in size until it was just Jim or one of the other riders checking in occasionally. But the message had been unequivocally received by everyone. Tommy Miller was under protection. More importantly, Tommy walked differently now, his head held high, shoulders back, a quiet confidence in his stride. The Iron Horsemen had given him something far more valuable than just safety. They'd given him confidence. At the end of the month, Tommy asked his mother for a disposable camera. When she asked why, he just smiled and said, "I want to remember some people who helped me." Back in his small, run-down rental house, Jim Lawson stared at the photograph in his trembling hands, then slowly lifted his gaze back up at the successful man Tommy Miller had become. "You're really a doctor now?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion, a mix of disbelief and immense pride. "Dr. Reed?" Tommy nodded, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Pediatric surgeon at Memorial Hospital, specialized in trauma cases." He chuckled softly. "I know what it's like to be a scared kid." "And you remembered me after all this time?" Jim murmured, still processing the surreal reunion. "How could I forget?" Tommy said, his voice earnest. "You changed my life, Mr. Lawson." Jim shook his head, a hint of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "We just gave some bullies something to think about. That's all." "It was more than that," Tommy insisted, his gaze firm. "Before you and the club stepped in, I was thinking about quitting everything. School, my dreams. Maybe even—" He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Maybe even living. That's how bad it had gotten." Jim looked stricken, a pained expression crossing his face. "Jesus, kid. We didn't know it was that bad." "How could you?" Tommy acknowledged. "But what you did, showing up like that day after day, it wasn't just about scaring off the bullies. You showed me that I mattered, that I was worth standing up for." Beverly Chen, who had been quietly observing their emotional reunion, now opened her briefcase. "That's actually why we're here today, Mr. Lawson." Jim's attention snapped back to the sharp attorney. "What do you mean?" "Tommy, Dr. Reed," she clarified, "came to our firm with an unusual request." She pulled out a folder of documents. "He asked us to locate you and to prepare these papers." Jim's familiar weariness returned, tinged with suspicion. "What kind of papers?" Tommy leaned forward, his expression full of compassion. "When I started looking for you last year, I expected to find you still with the Iron Horsemen. Still riding. But I learned the club disbanded 10 years ago, and that you'd been having some difficulties." Jim stiffened, a flicker of pride and defensiveness in his eyes. I get by just fine. I know you do, Tommy said gently, his voice understanding. That's who you are. But when I found out this house was up for sale and that you were worried about where you'd go next. He nodded to Beverly. She handed Jim the top document from her folder. This is the deed to this house, Mr. Lawson. It's been purchased and placed in your name. There's also a fund established to cover property taxes and maintenance for the next 20 years. Jim stared at the paper, uncomprehending. What are you talking about? I bought the house for you, Tommy said simply, his voice gentle and unwavering. It's yours now. No more rent. No more worrying about getting evicted when the landlord decides to sell. Jim's head snapped up, a flash of the old, fierce pride in his eyes. I don't take charity. It's not charity, Tommy replied, echoing Jim's own words from 30 years before, a profound circle closing. We take care of our friends, and you're my friend, Mr. Lawson. Always have been. For a long moment, Jim said nothing. His weathered face worked, the lines deepening as he fought for control of the overwhelming emotions swirling within him. Finally, he looked down at the photograph still clutched in his hand, at the skinny boy swallowed by the too big leather vest, at his own younger self standing protectively beside him. Your mom, Jim said finally, his voice hoarse. Gloria, is she... She's still with us, Tommy said, smiling warmly. Retired now. She lives with my family. She remembers you, too. Says to tell you thank you. Jim nodded, still struggling to compose himself. And the others? Bear? Tiny? Tommy's smile faded slightly. I tried to find them, too. Bear passed away about 5 years ago. Tiny moved out west somewhere. Jim absorbed this silently, another painful reminder of how many of his old friends were gone now. He looked around the small house. His house, apparently. The very place he'd been so sure he'd have to leave within months when the landlord's sale went through. I don't know what to say, he admitted finally, the words thick with emotion. Beverly pushed another document forward across the table. You just need to sign here and the property is officially yours. Jim stared at the paper, then back at Tommy. You know, we didn't think much about it at the time. The Escort, I mean. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Someone was hurting a kid, and we could stop it. Simple as that. The right thing isn't always simple, Tommy said, his gaze steady. And it isn't always done. You did it. You all did. Jim signed the paper with a hand that wasn't quite steady, the pen scratching faintly. As he handed it back to Beverly, he looked a little embarrassed. I wish the place was in better shape. If I'd known company was coming. Tommy smiled. Actually, I was hoping you might give me a tour. I'd like to hear more about what happened to everyone after you all helped me. As they stood to move, Jim paused. You know, I've got an old photo album around here somewhere, pictures of the whole club back then. He hesitated, a glint of memory in his eyes. And there might be some more photos of that week. The guys all thought it was pretty special. Our first community service project, you might say, started something of a tradition for us. I'd love to see those, Tommy said, genuine enthusiasm in his voice. As Jim led them toward the kitchen where he kept his old albums, he stopped and turned. Tommy, Dr. Reed, I have to ask, why go to all this trouble? You could have just sent a thank you note or something. Tommy considered the question seriously, his gaze distant for a moment. When I was doing my residency, I treated a lot of kids who'd been bullied. Some of them didn't make it. The statistical link between bullying and youth suicide is—" He caught himself, shaking his head. "Sorry. What I'm trying to say is, I've spent my career trying to save children in crisis, but I never forgot who saved me." He paused, his gaze meeting Jim's. "Every time I face a difficult surgery, I think about courage. The kind you and the Iron Horseman showed when you stood up for a kid nobody else would stand for." Jim blinked rapidly, visibly moved. "We were just a bunch of bikers." "You were heroes," Tommy corrected, his voice firm, unwavering. "My heroes. And this," he gestured at the deed on the table, "this is just me finally wearing the vest you gave me." An honorary Iron Horseman takes care of his own. Jim Lawson, who hadn't cried since the club disbanded 10 years ago, felt his eyes grow damp, a sudden overwhelming warmth spreading through him. He turned quickly, hiding his face, clearing his throat gruffly. "Well," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "those photo albums won't find themselves. Come on." Tommy and Beverly followed him into the kitchen where Jim began rummaging through a cabinet. As he searched, Tommy noticed the small, quiet details of Jim's life. The medication bottles lined up on the counter, the walking cane propped in the corner, the single plate and cup in the dish drainer. The former vice president of the Iron Horsemen, once the most feared motorcycle club in the county, now lived alone with just a cat and his memories. But then, Jim found what he was looking for: a battered leather album with the iconic Iron Horseman logo embossed on the cover. And as he opened it, his entire demeanor changed. He straightened, years seemingly falling away as he pointed to a faded photograph of dozens of bikers assembled in front of the old clubhouse. "That was all of us back in '95, he said, pride evident in his voice, now strong and clear. "Strongest club in 3 counties. As Jim turned the pages, sharing stories of epic rides and wild rallies and other kids they'd helped over the years, Tommy realized something important. In saving this house, he wasn't just repaying a debt from 30 years ago. He was preserving the last tangible connection Jim Lawson had to a time when he'd been part of something bigger than himself, something that had truly made a difference. 3 hours later, as Tommy and Beverly prepared to leave, Jim walked them to the door. The old biker looked different now, standing taller, his eyes brighter, more alive than when they'd first arrived. "I still can't believe you came all this way," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Couldn't have become the man I am without you showing up for me back then," Tommy replied, his gaze warm and direct. "Seemed only right I should show up for you now." Jim hesitated for a moment, then abruptly pulled Tommy into a rough, heartfelt hug. "You turned out good, kid," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Real good." As they stepped outside, Tommy turned back. "One more thing, Mr. Lawson. There's a box in the trunk of our car. Mind if I bring it in?" Jim looked puzzled, but nodded. Tommy went to the car and returned, carrying a large, flat box. Inside Jim's living room, he carefully opened it to reveal a framed, enlarged version of the very photograph Jim had just been holding. Tommy at 12, surrounded by the Iron Horseman, his small face a mix of awe and burgeoning confidence. "Thought you might like to have this on your wall," Tommy said, his voice soft. "To remember." Jim stared at the picture, at his younger self, standing tall and strong beside the boy he'd helped. Save. "I remember," he said softly, a profound peace settling over his features. Every day after Tommy and Beverly drove away, Jim Lawson stood in his doorway for a long time, looking out at the quiet street where once, 30 years ago, motorcycles had lined up, their engines rumbling to escort a bullied child to safety. The thunderous rumble of those engines had faded long ago, and most of the riders were gone now, too. But not all of them, and not everything they'd stood for. Jim turned and went back inside, closing the door of the house that was now truly his home. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd hang that photograph in a place of honor. And maybe, if his arthritis wasn't acting up too badly, he'd clean out that spare bedroom. Just in case Tommy wanted to bring his family by someday to hear more stories about the Iron Horsemen, and the summer they'd decided to protect a boy who dreamed of becoming a doctor. Some debts couldn't be repaid with houses or money, Jim thought, a warmth spreading through him. Some could only be repaid by living a life worthy of those who'd helped you along the way. By Tommy's measure, the Iron Horsemen had more than earned their keep in this world, and perhaps, Jim reflected as he carefully placed the photo album back in its cabinet, they weren't quite finished yet.